All right, Daniel, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about obstacles facing new advisors, why credentials matter when hiring a financial professional, and what trust actually looks like in a professional relationship.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. Okay, so judging by your questions, you are shopping around for a financial planner. Hit me, Daniel. I'm a financial planner. We can do business. What do you need?
So, I wanted to start with getting into the industry as a new advisor. It's difficult. There's a steep learning curve, and a lot of people really don't even know where to apply or what a quote unquote good job looks like. So, what are the actual challenges that new financial professionals are facing when getting into the industry?
I think first and foremost, there is a enormous amount of ambiguity about what being a financial planner is, how to start that career, and how to get into it. So, unlike becoming, let's say, a lawyer, where you know that you need to go to undergrad, take the LSAT, apply to law school, go to law school, graduate, sit the bar exam, and now you're an attorney and you can practice law. Become a financial planner essentially has almost no barriers to entry other than a single licensing exam to be an investment advisor, or potentially a couple of licensing exams to be an insurance broker or a stockbroker or all of the above. And otherwise, you fundamentally find yourself in a position where you are likely going to be influenced by the first business you ever go work for, or the first place you ever start your career and take your tests through, and so on. And you will likely develop an understanding of what financial planning is through that lens.
Okay, so a lot out there. And how does this all relate to clients? If planners are struggling to get into the industry, what is the impact this has on the families we serve?
Well, I think the easiest way to illustrate that is the client side of that, which is to treat you as my potential client here. If I tell you that we are a financial planning firm that does comprehensive, holistic financial planning for our clients to help them live their best financial lives, that tells you nothing about my qualifications. That tells you nothing about the actual behind the scenes process that we're going to do to provide you with advice and guidance about your financial interest. That doesn't tell you anything about how I get paid or what our relationship is going to be like or what legal standards of conduct will apply to the advice I give you. So fundamentally, it's problematic both for the people getting into the career field and also for consumers from the standpoint that all of the ambiguity that goes into getting into the profession in the first place compounds in the client relationships that are out there. We talk to people all the time who will say, well, I've had an advisor before, and they'll tell us that they've worked with one firm or another, and we'll know from a point of fact that they will, if they work with us, have a completely different experience. And it's not because we're star spangled awesome. It's just because the firm they worked with previously used something like the phrase financial planning as a marketing tool for the sale of investments or the sale of insurance, not to represent a more comprehensive, genuinely holistic process that's agnostic to the means, the income, the investments, or the products that the client might want to buy or need in their situation.
That's a really good point. And you brought up something earlier about how, lawyers have to go to law school and there's a set, you know, path for what that looks like for them. Financial planning is not really like that. There is no jurisprudence or precedence that we can all follow to say, all right, this is the model for doing financial planning correctly, and this is a bad model. Follow this one, ignore this one. I have a lot of friends, Dan, that early out of college they got jobs at, say, the recognizable names, whether it's a Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, to just throw out a few, and they're really excited and they know it's a big firm, reputable, job security, all that. Is this a good job, if you wanted to get into financial planning?
Frankly, I think the barriers to entry to getting into financial planning are so high in their ambiguity that to some extent I don't know that any job in financial planning is intrinsically good or bad in of itself. So I wouldn't look at any firm and say, like, don't start your career there. That's a terrible place to start your career. I think the bigger question becomes, what is your level of competency and skill going in? What are your career ambitions? So do you want to be client facing, client serving, or are you more interested in the technicals? I see a lot of people who are interested in sort of becoming portfolio managers or day traders who think that becoming a financial advisor is a good path to that when it is not. And so fundamentally, I think on a certain level, for people coming into the profession, the bigger question is going to be what is expected of you when you start your career, and is it reasonable for you? So when I say that, I'm talking about is the expectation that you're going to come here, spend 2, 3, 4 years learning the craft and the trade, supporting other planners' clients before you ever have client relationships, or is your first and only job get clients, sell them products or services, and then you can learn the craft as you go. And what suits your needs better, and what do you think is better for your clients? Particularly because it's a very common practice to ask new planners to phone up mom, dad, the neighbors, their roommates from college, and anybody they know and ask them to do business right out of the gate to help them get a warm start in that business development side of the career. And so if you're not comfortable with the products or services this firm offers or is expecting you to sell, then the question becomes not so much, is this a good place to start a career as a financial planner, so much as it is a question of, is this a good place for my friends or my family to do business and receive products or services necessary to help them live their best financial lives?
So building on that, one of the things you said in that comment there was how you can start your career under more experienced financial professionals, learning from them and helping them on cases, whether that's in a paraplanner or sort of an associate planner role. How do you look at someone when they're progressing and say, okay, they're ready to move on to the next stage?
I think it depends highly on the role they're in. So, I mean, I'll use myself as an example. When I started as a financial planner, I had an MBA, I had a certification in concentration in finance, I'd taken my licensing exams. So I knew basic and fundamental financial things, but I would not be a competent financial planner had I not had a support ecosystem of more senior planners to help me ensure that every piece of advice and guidance I was giving my clients at that time was appropriate for those clients and was going to be correct for those clients. So there's an element where on one side, if you've got sort of a business development oriented path, it could be okay if you've got the support mechanisms in place to make sure you're doing right by your clients. On the other side of that, though, if you're coming up from a technical development side, then fundamentally it becomes a lot more about, okay, does this person clearly understand enough to have a conversation and an educated conversation with this client? And do we have the support systems in place for this person to succeed if they get overwhelmed? And fundamentally, the way I put that is it's sort of like learning to swim. We put children who can't swim in pools or adults who can't swim in pools, and we start in the shallow end and we let it get deeper and deeper and we make them swim longer and longer. And, at the end of the day, there's very, very little risk to them, right? There's a trainer, there's a lifeguard, there's peers, parents, everybody around to make sure that nothing bad is going to happen. But you do have to put them in a little bit of danger, a little bit of risk. And I specifically mean the planner here or the advisor here. But you need to make sure that they're in a place where no harm will befall their clients as part of their learning and development. So to some extent, I don't think that somebody needs to be 100% ready to start doing the thing. It's much more about having safety mechanisms in place to protect their clients as they start to learn and develop.
Speaking on that analogy you used about the lifeguard and the swimmers and letting them quote unquote swim a little bit more when they're doing their training. Sticking with that analogy, do you believe that older, more experienced financial planners have a duty or a responsibility to be that lifeguard to their younger swimmers?
If that's the relationship they've established with their peers or with their employees, yes. So, like, if you're just a senior planner at a big firm who doesn't hire new planners or who is not paid to be a trainer or a mentor or who has not volunteered for that type of role, I'd say no, just because it's not actually your job necessarily. But if you're a firm like My Wealth Planners here, where we hire aspiring financial planners and students and folks to become financial planners, we have an obligation to develop you technically, but we also have an obligation to protect your clients over time and make sure that as you become more and more technically proficient, that you don't get out over your skis or that you don't get into the deep end in a place where they're endangered. I think the thing that we have to reconcile is every surgeon has a first surgery, right? Everybody has sort of a first time, and the first time, as long as it's deliberate and planned for and prepared for, almost nothing could go wrong. But there's always a risk, and so it behooves the firm and it behooves those more experienced planners to ensure that new planners are in a position to succeed, to help their clients live their best lives, and that ultimately everybody benefits from the process.
Great. So you mentioned starting your career in financial planning, already having gotten your MBA, having a concentration in finance, and anybody that looks into you a little bit more is quickly going to get lost in the alphabet soup of letters that follows your name, and it's clear you have the technical credentials to do this work very well. But to somebody who isn't working in our field every day, those letters might all look the same, and it's difficult to differentiate which are of greater importance than maybe others. So could you take a minute and explain the importance of credentials when it comes to looking for an advisor?
Sure. I'm gonna probably rub a couple professionals listening to this the wrong way, but I'm gonna be pretty direct about this. If a consumer is looking for a financial planner, they need to look for somebody who has the CFP certification, or they need to look for somebody who works within a firm that takes a team approach that has people with the CFP certification on hand. CFP certification is the Certified Financial Planner designation. And ironically, as somebody who has it, who advocates for it, who just said what I just said, it itself is not a pure sign of competency. It is, in my opinion, the professional table stakes of competency, right? It is like saying, hey, is your doctor an MD or a DO, right? Does your attorney have their Juris Doctorate? Having the MD or the DO or the JD does not make you a good doctor or a good lawyer. Having the CFP certification does not make you a good financial planner. It is an indicator of barest competence. And so that means that in certain circumstances, you might work with somebody who doesn't have it. And there's a whole variety of reasons they may not have it, but that person should be supported by somebody who does have their CFP certification, or that should have resources to help fill that gap. Otherwise, you are fundamentally just trusting that this person knows what they're doing, and you don't have any way of validating that whatsoever. Beyond that, there's a number of other designations and certifications, but I'll stop rambling here for a second and let you ask another question to better direct that.
So you mentioned all these different credentials, and how the CFP is of great importance for financial planners. However, it's really table stakes. At best, it really gives you a ticket to the ball game. It doesn't give you a win in the game itself. So how do you measure credentials and competency? If all you can see is the letters behind the name, how do you know if they're actually doing their job well?
So this is a really tricky area. This really gets into something called signaling theory, in which we ultimately, as consumers of products, goods, and services, have to rely on the signals that professionals or firms provide us. So signals that a firm like My Wealth Planner sends out, for example, we are fee only. That is a signal that we don't take compensation from other places. That's a signal to an educated consumer that we have less conflicts of interest than a firm that does accept payments from third parties, whether that be commissions or revenue sharing. The CFP certification, that is a signal of financial planning competency, but as I just said, it's not a pure indicator of total competency. So fundamentally, when you're looking at firms and evaluating firms, or looking at a professional and evaluating it, it behooves you to ask questions. It behooves you to ask, how do you get paid? What is your service model? What is my timeline and my expectation for the services you're going to provide? And the trick here is, this may be the very first time you're consuming financial planning services, the first time you're becoming a planning firm's client. So it can be difficult to assess. But I think in that regard, it also helps to even ask your peers, hey, what signals have you experienced, right? Do you work with a planner? Have you worked with a planner? How are they qualified? How did you vet them? I'm not super bullish on the idea of simply taking a recommendation from a friend or a family member. Hey, work with John. John's great. Because there's tons of people who are getting referred to terrible, incompetent professionals or predatory professionals. So I wouldn't rely purely on the referral, but I would try to listen to the stories that your peer group, the people you trust, tell about their professional experiences. And frankly, it never hurts to ask for a second opinion before you take the leap, right? That expression of measure twice, cut once. Once you start an engagement with a financial planner, it's a big commitment, regardless of the service they offer, because it will be financially intensive, time intensive, energy intensive. And so ultimately, I think you do a lot of favors to yourself by looking before you leap, by evaluating the signals, doing your homework, asking for second opinions before you make a full commitment.
So going off of that a little bit, let's say a family was vetting advisors and was generating a list of questions or things that they should look at. What are some red flags regarding either credentials or experience that, families should be aware of when looking for advisors?
I think the first red flag to look out for has already been mentioned, which is, again, are you a CFP professional, or do you work on a team with a CFP professional? If the answer is no, I have immediate reservations simply because there's no signal of competency here. Or at least if there is a signal, the signal is just experience or brand, or they seem really nice. So just that bare credential requirement. I think beyond that, the kind of the questions that come up that become important here. What is your service model? Explain to me what our initial engagement looks like. Explain to me what it looks like over the course of the next 6 months, what it looks like over the course of the first year, what it's going to look like 5 years from now. You need to understand what they're offering. Are they offering short, limited time engagements? Are they offering a comprehensive, ongoing package? Right? Is it a subscription based service? Is it a project based service? Is it hourly? Just really dig in. Like, what is the service you offer? What are you going to do for me? Because it's easy to fall into a trap of financial planner does financial planning, but it turns out professionals do this stuff in hugely different ways, in many, many different styles, approaches, and tempos. So just the service model alone is a really important question. Do I think I need long-term ongoing service? Am I going to need help over the long term, or do I have one really specific circumstance or issue that I'm really trying to get better guidance on? I think the next question to ask then is, how are you compensated for that? And typically at this stage, you're going to be told, we charge an hourly fee, or we charge a flat project fee, or we charge a fee based on your investment assets or your net worth or something like that. You need to then compare how they charge to the service they've described to you, right? Does it seem reasonable? So if somebody says, we charge $2,000 just to build you a plan and that's it, that's probably a pretty reasonable cost. If somebody says they charge $300 or $400 an hour for hourly services, that's probably a reasonable cost. If somebody says we charge, 1% of your investment assets or 0.5% of your net worth for an ongoing service, that's probably a reasonable cost. So you just need to be able to compare the value, right, the services you're expecting to receive to the costs that are being proposed to make sure you think there's a healthy match of those two things for you individually or personally. Beyond that, I think the sneakier question to really get your arms around here is, how are you licensed? What are your licenses? Right. And then understanding the different types of licenses and what that truly means, which we could talk about here in a minute if we'd like to. And then understanding from that, how does that affect your compensation? How does that affect your firm's compensation? Because those are not necessarily synonyms, right? There can be different ways that the planner is compensated versus the firm is compensated. And then can you write all of this down for me? Right, everything you've told me here, can you write it down, disclose it to me in writing, so that I have a copy of it that I can refer to in the future? And if you have any discomfort with any step of the conversation, it's okay to walk away. There are plenty of financial planners out there. Keep shopping, keep searching until you find what you feel is a really good fit that you have really strong trust and confidence in.
I do want to touch on that last point you made a little bit there about specific licenses, because as someone who works in this industry every day, we know the difference between, this license versus that license and what that allows you to do or sell. Can we talk about that a little bit for the people who might not have that good of an idea of what certain licenses entail?
Sure. I'm going to describe this in what I would call the lowest to the highest burdens. And when I say that, I'm talking about regulatory burdens placed on the licensed professional to do things that are in your interest, that are best for you, aka from the least amount of protection for you to the greatest amount of protection for you. And before I do that, again, none of these licenses, just like the CFP, none of these licenses is a perfect signal of total competency and trustworthiness for you, but just recognize there are different levels of burden. So the first level I'll talk about would just be insurance licenses. This can be home and auto. This can be life insurance, health, disability, long-term care. But fundamentally, insurance licenses are governed at the state level. So your levels of consumer protections can vary state by state. And the burden for the sale of insurance products to you is that their advice to you or their guidance to you is supposed to be solely incidental to the sale of a product. So if somebody says, I have my life insurance license, that's my only license, but I'm going to do comprehensive financial planning for you. How a regulator recognizes that is any financial planning it might do for you is a very complex sales pitch and analysis to perhaps determine the best product for you to then recommend and sell to you. That's the relationship that they're governed by. It doesn't matter, again, if it's life insurance, disability, long-term care, they're all governed the same way in that sense. Your recourse in that world, right, if you got good advice, bad advice, so on, is pretty limited because fundamentally any recourse you have is going to be related to the product itself and whether it was appropriate for you. It doesn't have to be the best thing for you, doesn't have to be the perfect solution for you, it just has to be adequate and appropriate. So if you have a need for life insurance, that professional is not necessarily liable if they recommend a policy for you that is not the best policy for you. It just has to be a really good policy or an appropriate policy for you. I'll pause there before we go on to the next stage if you have any questions.
No, keep going. This is great.
Okay. The next level then I would say is going to be a investment broker level. The three licenses you're listening for here would be, one is not necessarily a license, but it's sort of a precursor. It is called the Securities Industry Essentials Examination, or the SIE. It is a precursor exam to then sitting for the either Series 6 or the Series 7 license. A Series 6 is a variable products license, enabling that person to sell you products like mutual funds or variable annuities or variable universal life insurance or something like that. And the Series 7 is a registered representative exam, also known as a stockbroker exam, which effectively means they are licensed to sell you either investment products or to trade on commission for you. So to buy stocks, buy bonds, sell bonds, so on and so forth, and be paid per transaction as part of that relationship. The burdens here are slightly higher than those in insurance. These would typically fall under what we call a regulation best interest. Notably, the penalties for violating regulation best interest are really not any more stringent than the insurance penalties, but the standard is slightly higher here. They do have to recommend for you investment products or trades that are in your best interest, but that only has to happen within the scope of the services and products they offer. The only way they can really get in trouble there is if they either recommend a subpar choice from the catalog that's available to them, made available to them by their firm, or they recommend something for you that is just completely inappropriate. So you're, let's say, a 95-year-old and they're recommending kind of these annuity products or high-risk products that probably don't make sense based on your age or your appropriate risk tolerance. So that's where the standards are higher than insurance marginally, just because you have a regulation best interest requirement, but there's no fiduciary obligation. And so the next tier that we talk about would be the Series 65, the Investment Advisor Representative exam, or the Series 66, which is a hybrid exam of the essentially of a security sales license and the Investment Advisor's Representative exam. When a professional is working for you under that Investment Advisor's license, the 65 or the 66, they do have a fiduciary obligation to you. That means that the burden of their conduct is a duty of loyalty and a duty of care. They have to make recommendations in your best interest. And if they violate that, if they make recommendations that are not in your best interest and there's a harm caused by that, then they can be liable for treble damages or essentially 3x the value of whatever they cost you. So if their poor advice or their recommendation that was not in your best interest costs you 10 grand, they could be on the hook for up to 30 grand. So there's a lot more teeth there. The burden is higher. But as I said at the top, not any particular license, not any set of credentials is a perfect signal of total competency. It's always about, is this professional able to offer me what I need specifically? Are they compensated reasonably for it? And do I understand their conflicts of interest and how they're compensated? And have they overtly, directly in writing disclosed these conflicts to me such that I am completely clear about the nature of the relationship we have and any interaction, the conflicts of interest they have with my relationship.
That's excellent. There's a lot of really good information in there on vetting advisors and how to find somebody who might be a better fit for you, which is really important because it's very difficult when especially you search online to know the difference between someone you can and maybe can't trust, which I think is a really great segue into the third question I wanted to ask you today or topic. So, in the industry, we always talk about building trust with families and individuals. But trust is kind of abstract. It's squishy. It's not a quantifiable thing that we can start to measure, which we love to do as planners. So exactly, how do you go about building trust with clients and even potential clients, Dan?
I mean, trust is earned Fundamentally, there's that element of signaling. Most people who come to us as a firm tend to come to us having already done their homework to some extent, right? They found us largely because they've been reading about how to find a financial planner, and they've read a lot of articles about look for a CFP professional, look for a fee-only planner. Here are different kind of reliable databases that tend to have good planners in them, and here's how you can search for it. Or people have been referred to us, and so there's sort of a trust from their existing relationship. The question of how to build trust is an interesting one because there's a lot of research that shows that the cost of building trust adversely affects clients. But at the same time, the cost of trusting the wrong person is substantially greater. And so fundamentally, those signals become sort of an entry point. It's what starts the conversation. Hey, I Googled fee only CFP professional near me, and you're who came up. So I already have some trust from those signals, but now we need to build the relationship. I think from a consumer standpoint, how you think about building trust with the planner, do yourself a favor and just pay attention to what the planner is asking you about. Are they asking you about means, or are they asking you about outcomes? So, for example, when we have conversations with potential clients, sometimes people come in, they sit down at the table, they say hi, and they start to sort of word vomit everything about their personal finances. I've got a 401k and an annuity, and we've got a 529 for our kids, and this and that and that and this. And I'll tell you, as a financial planner, that's all relevant information. And if you had just let me talk first or speak first in that moment, I wouldn't have asked you about any of it. Because when I start to have a conversation with a potential client, if I can get the first word in, if I can drive the conversation, what I want to know is, who are you? What is it that you think you can accomplish by engaging me as a professional? How do you think if we work together, can make your life that much better? Right? How can I improve your circumstances? And so that's sort of the thing to pay attention to as a consumer is, if the planner is driving the conversation, if you just let them ask the question first, is their question about, hey, what do you got? Or is their question about, what do you want? What are you attempting to accomplish this process? And that entire first conversation ideally should just be about getting to know the planner getting to know you, and both of you making a fair and balanced assessment of, can this planner do what I need them to do? Do I trust them to have a deeper conversation about my situation, about my finances, about my resources or my liabilities or whatever is in play? And in turn, are they spending this whole conversation getting to know me personally in the absence of a direct interest in my net worth or my income or something like that? I think that's where we build trust, is in that first conversation in particular. I think it behooves the planner to really focus on getting to know this potential client as a person, as a family, right? As an individual who has ambitions and dreams and worries and hopes. And it behooves the client to assess the planner. Are they interested in me? Are they interested in what I want out of this process? Or are all their questions just driving at the amount of money I can invest, or the amount of insurance I might need, or how much I could roll over to them from my workplace plan? Are they really oriented on the things that are going to get them paid, or are they really oriented on what I need from them as a professional?
I think that first meeting, like you said, is so important. You only get to make a first impression once, and that goes for, the client looking at the advisor, but it also goes for the advisor looking at the client and saying, hey, is this somebody that I think I can have a long-term and meaningful relationship with? Earlier in the conversation, I talked about credentials and designations, which I personally think in part help build trust as well. But let's say, somebody's like you, Dan, they have this alphabet soup behind their name and, a lot of experience and qualifications. As a financial planner, how do you effectively communicate these qualifications and experience to potential clients in a way that's going to build trust, but not come across almost as boastful?
I think the funny thing is the more you talk about yourself as a planner, the worse of a job you're doing. Your experience should speak for itself. Your knowledge should speak for itself. If a client's asking you, hey, do you have experience in this? You should be honest, right? I know about this, or I don't know about this. I have an education or credentials that support this, or I don't. I work with clients who've had this problem before, or I've never seen this problem before. I think if you spend the whole meeting saying, well, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I am a certified financial planner who is also an accredited investment fiduciary and a chartered financial consultant, and so on and so forth. You're bragging. And those are signals, right? And that might help the client assess your competency. But people tend to make decisions emotionally. And from that standpoint, the question is, does bragging about yourself build trust, or is it just bragging? I think, in the sense of being competent and being an ethical professional, most consumers are not in a good position to assess your qualifications, very much in the same way that you or I would have a very hard time assessing the qualifications of a surgeon. You are a doctor, you work at a hospital, you are in the surgical department. That's all I got, right? And if you have fancy letters behind your name, I can Google, but I don't really understand the value of those letters. It's not my world, it's not my domain. At a certain point, I can poke and prod and ask questions, but I sort of just have to trust and rely that you are a competent professional. So I think asking questions that help build trust as a consumer is much more valuable than as a financial planner just trying to sort of insert credentials into the conversation.
Trust is one of these things that almost compounds. You meet with somebody this year, and through being dependable and consistent and credible over years, you can build and increase that trust. But for advisors or new folks getting into the industry, what advice would you have to them if they wanted to build trust and a trustworthy practice with clients?
You build trust by being trustworthy. And I think from a client perspective, depending on your stage of experience, your existing credentials, or the credentials you're pursuing, it comes with being transparent. If you're a new planner, it comes with saying, hey, I'm a new planner, but I work with a firm or with a team or with a mentor who can help me with anything that I'm not comfortable with. I think showing that vulnerability and being forthright and honest about that helps. I think being direct about the limitations you might experience helps, right? I'll give you an example. If somebody came to us, despite all the qualifications we have in this firm, if they said, hey, I need help moving assets from my home country of Guatemala to the United States, I would have to say, I'm sorry, despite all the alphabet soup I have, that's not a skill set we have here, and that's not something I could competently and effectively help you with. And I don't have the mechanisms in place to help me answer this. I don't have the in-house relationships or professional relationships to really bridge that gap. So you would not be well served by me, and I owe you the honesty of that answer, and I'm going to try to help you find somebody who can. On the other side of that, if I'm a brand new planner and you're my very first potential client, I think it's okay to just say that. Hey, I'm going to be honest. You're my first client I'm ever going to work with one to one. But again, I do have the resources and the support or the mentors or the team behind me to make sure that you're going to be taken care of. So I'll be honest. You might have a question or two for me that I'm not ready to answer on the fly, but I promise you we can get you an answer. And then just recognizing that your firm and your team can support you in that process. Because again, everybody has their first surgery, everybody has their first skydive or their first swim, right? And so fundamentally, sometimes we get to be the first one as a client, sometimes we get to be the professional having the first one, and we just need to be honest and forthright and transparent about that as we go into it.
Excellent. I think that's really great stuff. So could have summed it up in one sentence, Dan. In order to build trust, you do have to be trustworthy. I think that's pretty simple, but not easy to do. So I appreciate it.
Very true. Well, you've been on back-to-back weeks here, so I'll give you a little bit of a bye and asking you what you've learned in the past week. But if you have a lesson or an insight you'd like to share with the audience, feel free.
I'm going to stick to the clients for this one. I think financial planning, almost like anything else, is one of these things that you get out what you put in. And we have a lot of clients that are heavily engaged and committed to the process. And then we also have clients or even potential clients who come in, they, like you mentioned, they haven't done any research. Their questions, or maybe lack thereof, aren't going to actually benefit them significantly in any way. And, as planners, we do our homework for every meeting. And I think one of the things I've realized is the clients that do their homework tend to have better and more meaningful relationships. So for the potential clients out there, I think doing your homework and putting the effort in on your end will make the relationship that much better for you and your finances long term.
100%. The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.